Session 19, 10th November 2022. Session 19, 10th November 2022. The exegesis of Quran summarized by ex-Brigadier Mustafa Billah. With a break of a day, we begin again by the grace of Allah. We were on Eid Sirah, the fifth surah of Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha. Eidina Siratal Mustaqim. Eidina Siratal Mustaqim. Give us the right path. Give us the right path. والذين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين إذا أصابهم البغي هم ينتصرون. Surah 42 verse 39. Translation: And those believers are such that when they are tormented, oppressed in any form, they retaliate and take revenge to defend themselves. They keep themselves prepared and not such that they ask the Lord to fight for them. Not doing anything themselves, that is, not doing anything themselves. They forgive when they are wronged as individuals, or when forgiveness, disregarding, and overlooking is preferable for the cause of Allah. They are aware that the disbelievers are their enemies forever. They are aware that the disbelievers are their enemies forever. They therefore bring them into their security fold and disarm them to save themselves, and disarm them to save themselves of their treachery and their ardent desire to subjugate and persecute the believers. They, that is, the believers, wage war, jihad, against the disbelievers. The believers are the vicegerents of Allah, the guardians, protectors of the subjugated, the persecuted, the harmed, the ones who enforce justice, as directed by Allah. They are the ones who enforce justice as directed by Allah, not of themselves, not their own parochial justice, as do the disbelievers, not of themselves, not their own parochial justice, as do the disbelievers, and they forgive, and they give peace, and they give peace to the mankind, and they give peace to the mankind, saving it of the hands of the disbelievers, the unjust. The believers do not exploit the weak, the helpless, the less fortunate people and societies, and do not usurp their resources, and genuine rights. They ensure justice and guarantee the rights of other people. They ensure justice and guarantee the rights of other people in the use and development of all resources in trade, in commerce, following strictly the principles laid down by Allah for His mankind. Allah's justice prevents mankind waging wars for the natural resources of the world. Allah's justice prevents mankind waging wars for the natural resources of the world. Ashura Surah 42 verse 40. وَجَزَاءُ سَيِّئَةٍ سَيِّئَةٌ مِثْلُهَا فَمَنْ عَفَا وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الظَّالِمِينَ. Surah 42 verse 40. And at all levels, individual and collective, public and private, requital, recompense for a wrong is an injury for that wrong to the same extent, provided the act in itself is not a sin. I repeat, and at all levels, individual and collective, public and private, requital, recompense for a wrong is an injury for that wrong to the same extent, provided the act in itself is not a sin. But those who forgive, condone, and reconcile, restore harmony to end the rift, their reward and remuneration is affixed with Allah. Surely He doesn't like the transgressors, oppressors, the unbelievers, the wrongdoers. Surely He doesn't like the transgressors, oppressors, the unbelievers, the wrongdoers. This was the translation of the verse. Now elaboration. When private and public matters, leadership in and of the society, and the macro level inter-regional and inter-society, inter-civilization affairs are controlled, managed, and dealt by the believers, these are in safe hands. These are in safe hands to the advantage of the mankind. Their conduct has to align with the injunctions of Allah. The conduct of the believers has to align with the injunctions of Allah. Therefore, predictable, reliable, and beneficial for all. Broadly, about seven qualities, attributes have been mentioned by Allah here in verse 36:40. In verse 36:40, which differentiate the believers from the rest of the people, which differentiate the believers from the rest of the people, unbelievers, the sinful. A. They have faith and full trust in Allah. One, that is, they have faith and full trust in Allah that He is always kind to help them at all times, all occasions, and everywhere, and who is well aware of their compulsions, limitations, requirements, desires precisely. They do not get jittery, panicky, do not overreact, using hammer for the flies. Do not overreact using hammer for the flies because of their own unwanted fears and apprehensions, and do not eventually become unbearable, intolerable, and abnormal creatures, and do not eventually become unbearable, intolerable, and abnormal creatures. 2. They desist from major sins, blatant permissiveness, blatant permissiveness, They are modest. They do not have any major weaknesses or failing in their character which could lead to their downfall and disgrace, thereby creating crisis proportional to the scope and effects of their power. They do not have any major weaknesses or failing in their character which could lead to their downfall and disgrace, thereby creating crisis proportional to the scope and effects of their power. Obviously, they wouldn't tolerate grave sins and blatant shamelessness around. Obviously, they wouldn't tolerate grave sins and blatant shamelessness around to the immense benefit of the society. To the immense benefit of the society. 3. Man gets blind to reason in rage and temper. Man gets blind to reason in rage and temper, but they forgive people even at such times, mainly for the fear of Allah. Not only do they retain a sense of balance, not only do they retain a sense of balance between the right and wrong, between what is their due and the excess, even in this state, in blind rage. Even in this state, they forgive their right. Even in this state, they forgive their right. It obviously implies that even when reason flees to brutish beasts, it obviously implies that even when reason flees to brutish beasts with other beings, they are prepared to listen. They are prepared to listen because they are trained to work in mutual consultation. Zafar, the famous King Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, said, Zafar आदमी उसको न जानिएगा चाहे हो कितना साहिब फहम यका जिसे ऐश में याद खुदा न रही जिसे तैश में खौफ खुदा न रहा. Zafar, I have translated it also. Zafar, remember, do not count him a man. Zafar, remember, don't count him a man, even if made of amber, who doesn't remember God and affluence, who doesn't remember God and affluence, who doesn't fear God in anger, who doesn't fear God in anger. 4. They accept and obey Allah's instructions in a happy manner. They accept and obey Allah's instructions in a happy manner, there and then, without delay, and in the manner directed, even at times when these appear inconvenient or difficult. For their aim of life, for their aim of life is to seek the pleasure of Allah. For their aim of life is to seek the pleasure of Allah. And the way of their life is the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the way of their life is the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They do not mind the rough and the rigors, the buffets of fate, their feet in blisters, if Allah is happy with them. They do not mind the rough and the rigors, the buffets of fate, their feet in blisters, if Allah is happy with them. 5. They decide important matters with consultation, seek advice, even if it be from the walls. In the matters of the state, it is obligatory by Quran and Sunnah to seek advice. In the matters of the state, it is obligatory by Quran and Sunnah to seek advice. The head of the state, the caliph, is to be selected with mutual consultation. The head of the state, the caliph, is to be selected with mutual consultation. Making the decisions of the ill educated and the sinful binding in the selection of the leaders leads to the moral degeneration of the society. Making the decisions of the ill educated and the sinful binding in the selection of the leader leads to the moral degeneration of the society. The moral values, standards are perpetually on the decline since decades for the reason that religious values have been substituted, replaced with secular standards because of the secular systems, secular ideologies in vogue. The moral values, standards are perpetually on the decline since decades for the reason that religious values have been substituted, replaced with secular standards because of the secular systems, democracy, etc., secular ideologies in vogue. So values no longer retain their permanence. So values no longer retain their permanence because of the absence of religions. This glaring degeneration in all societies and civilizations of the world doesn't require elaboration. It doesn't require elaboration. The majorities in these systems vote people of their own caliber and standards into power. The secular systems, the direct antithesis of religions, cannot be used to support or sustain anything, any system based on the scriptures of Allah. These are mutually excluding eternally. These are mutually excluding eternally. 6. They spend in the way of Allah for the pleasure of Allah. They spend in the way of Allah for the pleasure of Allah. Seventh and the last year. And when they're harmed, persecuted, they retaliate in equal limits when it is not appropriate to forgive in the interest of the believers. And when they're harmed, persecuted, they retaliate in equal limits when it is not appropriate to forgive in the interest of the believers and for the eventual benefit of the perpetrator himself and for the eventual benefit of the perpetrator himself. When the initiator of access is contrite, repentant, and forgiveness will not be pernicious for the believers, and forgiveness will not be pernicious for the believers, and will have reformatory effects for the future, and will have reformatory effects for the future, it is better to forgive. In contraindications, punitive action is more appropriate. In contraindications, punitive action is more appropriate. 42 Ashura, verse 41. وَلَمَنْ أَنْتَصَرَ بَعْدَ ظُلْمِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَا عَلَيْهِم مِّنَ السَّبِيلِ. Translation. And those who avenge when wronged are not to be blamed, held accountable. The Quranic Surah verse says, and those who avenge when wronged are not to be blamed, held accountable. Next verse, Ashura 42, verse 42. إنما السبيل على الذين يظلمون الناس ويبغون في الأرض بغير الحق أولئك لهم عذاب أليم. Translation. And this is the last verse today. Only those people are blameworthy who oppress, commit atrocities on people, and terrorize them, and terrorize the people in the country for no fault. It is they for whom there is a grievous torture hereafter. It is they for whom there is a grievous torture hereafter. That's the end for today. Shall meet inshallah tomorrow if Allah be willing. Till then, please pray for me. Ex-Brigadier Mustansar Billah.